James Forrest completed the Nuttalls in record time. Credit James Forrest. James Forrest has climbed so many mountains this year that he can't remember which was first. It was in the Pennines, the northern Pennines, he says uncertainly. It might have been Great Dunfell. What he can remember, though, is the appalling weather. Like all good adventures, it started in a horrific storm. Torrential rain, terrible weather. The adventure an attempt not only to climb the 446 mountains of England and Wales in record time, but to fit it in with his day job. Oh, and while wearing his wife's old hiking boots. He had a mountain to climb, and then some more. But on September 16, Forrest's successful ascent of Scafell Pike completed the challenge and secured him the record. He did it in precisely 6 months, enough to make him faster than any of the 292 people who did it before him. The challenge is known in the hiking world as the Nuttalls, not because of a fanciful claim by Paul, the former UKIP leader with a record of dubious boasts, but after John and Anne, who in writing the mountains of England and Wales gave their name to the 446 peak course. Forrest celebrates after conquering Scafell Pike. Credit James Forrest. I felt a mix of relief, excitement, gratitude, joy, elation, says Forrest, thinking back to the moment he reached the last summit. Remarkably, because Scafell Pike can be incredibly busy on a Saturday and even in September, there was no one around. I had the summit to myself for a few minutes, and that felt like the perfect ending to me. John Nuttalls' confirmation of the new record concluded a 6-month period of furious mountaineering in which Forrest reached an average of 2.5 peaks a day. One day he even climbed 13 after an extremely early start in northeast Wales' Berwyn Range. Every peak, in keeping with the mountain definition used by the Nuttalls, was 2,000 feet or more. Forrest looks to Crib Goch, Snowdonia. Credit James Forrest. Forrest quit his job as a charity worker in 2016 to travel the world with his wife, Rebecca. Together they backpacked in Bali, climbed mountains in Australia and took a camper van tour of New Zealand. Since then, he has been working as a travel writer alongside a 3-day-a-week job helping maintain the paths of the Lake District. Balancing all this with conquering the Nuttalls resulted in what Forrest calls a strange double life. He says, I was partly just doing my job and sending emails and going to meetings, and going shopping and hanging out with my wife, and partly becoming this crazy adventurer, just throwing my stuff in my car and driving off to far-flung places and going wild camping for 5 days and climbing as many mountains as I could. Top 5 James' favorite English and Welsh mountains. Britain. Being Britain, his hikes were beset by wind, cold and rain. I worked it out and it rained on more than 50% of my hikes, Forrest says. Rushing through the challenge, he was unable to wait for days with good weather. The penalty was cloud-obscured views from more than 100 of the summits. And of course there were dangerous moments. Hiking in the high Carnetto Mountains in Snowdonia, Forrest started out in good weather but was soon assaulted by gale-force winds and diluvial rain. The wind was so strong that you could barely stand up. I was going to be wild camping that night, which would have been incredibly foolish. Camping in a flimsy tent sometimes landed Forrest in trouble. Credit James Forrest. Forrest was lucky to find an emergency mountain shelter. He spent the night there and continued the trek in the morning. The conditions led to hardship, but I got a perverse pleasure out of taking on Mother Nature and surviving and making it through. Despite having seen the best of Australian mountaineering and the worst of British weather, Forrest treasures the landscapes he encountered here. I think we've got amazing scenery, beautiful mountainous areas. I've gone traveling all around the world, but I think the great British countryside takes some beating. The 10 best walking holidays for 2017. The rain has something to do with this. In Britain everything is so green, he says. There's something different in each area. In, say, the Pennines, it was a bit bleak, a bit remote. There was a kind of desolate, lonely charm to those hills that no one walks, where you don't see anyone for days. Then you've got places like the Lake District and Snowdonia where you've got knife-edge ridges and dramatic cliff faces and crags. And then, say, other places like the Yorkshire Dales. I found that it was actually in these sorts of quaint villages, and the people you meet along the way, that there's that kind of Englishness with a real charming aspect to it as well. Forrest climbs Hartop Dod, a fell in the Lake District. Credit James Forrest. And he did it all in his wife's hiking boots. When Forrest started the challenge, he explains, his own pair of hiking boots were riddled with holes, so he took an unwanted pair of Rebecca's. They were a little bit blackened, but they were in decent nick. She didn't like them because they gave her blisters and were a bit uncomfortable, so she lent them to me, or I kind of commandeered them, for my first few hikes. Just by coincidence I actually quite liked them. Rebecca didn't join Forrest on the hikes, but packed him off with flapjacks each time and met him below Scafell Pike after his last descent. She might need to wave him off again soon, however. If anything, my wanderlust has kind of gone into overdrive, says Forrest, who is planning a mountaineering trip to Scotland and a return to New Zealand. Let's hope Rebecca's boots last a little longer.